disappointment, the pain, and the loss that you go through. Roller coaster ride with fertility. I just have, and I have. It has never been easy for me.
Nicole Kidman has spent decades at the very top of Hollywood, building a reputation as one of the most talented and dedicated actresses of her generation. She has played queens and killers, grieving mothers and fierce survivors, always bringing a level of emotional honesty to her work that very few performers can match. The image she projects to the world is one of grace, composure, and polished professionalism. But behind that image, the reality of working in Hollywood has never been entirely smooth. Over the years, quiet stories have emerged about tension on sets, creative disagreements, subtle power struggles, and moments where two strong personalities simply could not find a comfortable way to share the same space. Some of these stories involved people she loved, others involved people she barely knew, and at least one involves a situation that went far beyond personal friction and into something much darker. 7 names keep coming up when people who know the industry talk honestly about the collaborations that tested Nicole Kidman the most. If you enjoy these kinds of honest, behind-the-scenes stories about what really happens when the cameras stop rolling in Hollywood, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. There is always more to uncover, and you will not want to miss what is coming next. The first name on the list is also the most personal one, and in many ways, the most complicated: Tom Cruise. It would be easy to look back at their relationship and reduce it to a simple story about a Hollywood marriage that did not work out, but the reality was far more layered than that. When Nicole Kidman fell in love with Tom Cruise, she was still a young woman who had not yet fully figured out who she was or what she wanted her life to look like, and stepping into a relationship with one of the most famous people on the planet did not make that process of self-discovery any easier. Cruise was already a global phenomenon when they got together, a star whose name and face were known in virtually every country in the world. Kidman, talented and rising, found herself stepping into a world that had already been built entirely around someone else. Through the 1990s, they looked, from the outside, like Hollywood's ideal couple: glamorous, powerful, seemingly untouchable. But the pressure behind that image was constant and exhausting. The most intense professional moment they shared came on the set of Eyes Wide Shut, the final film directed by Stanley Kubrick. The production was notoriously long and demanding, with Kubrick pushing both of them into a deeply immersive and emotionally exposing process that deliberately blurred the boundary between their real relationship and the one they were playing on screen. Kidman later said the experience left her feeling both exhilarated and completely drained, something that stayed with her long after the shooting was finished. Off the set, the imbalance between them was becoming harder to ignore. She was still searching for her own identity, while he already had one firmly established, and the gap between where each of them stood in their careers shaped the dynamic of their relationship in ways that were not always comfortable. She has reflected since on how often she felt she was standing in his shadow during those years, supporting rather than leading, present but not entirely herself. When their marriage ended in 2001, the public explanation pointed to diverging careers and different directions, but the emotional reality beneath that was considerably more complex. She was still young, still figuring herself out, and suddenly doing it alone under an extraordinarily harsh spotlight. The end of the marriage shook her deeply, but it also pushed her towards something more grounded and more genuinely her own. She eventually found that in her life with Keith Urban and rebuilt herself in a way that felt real and sustainable. Cruise, for his part, handled the separation without bitterness or public conflict, keeping their shared past behind a respectful kind of silence. There was never hatred between them, and it would be wrong to frame their story that way. It was something more human and more complicated than that. Two people who loved each other, pulled in different directions by ambition and youth and the relentless pressure of living their lives in front of the entire world. The second name is Salma Hayek, and this one requires a bit of careful unpacking because most of what people think they know about it comes from a single video clip that lasted about 6 seconds. At the Balenciaga show during Paris Fashion Week in 2023, Hayek reached out and gently touched Kidman's arm, apparently trying to guide her into position for photographs. Kidman pulled away and was clearly caught on camera saying the words, "Don't touch me." The clip spread across the internet almost instantly, and within hours, people were constructing elaborate theories about a long-running feud between the two women, reading years of hidden resentment into those 6 seconds of footage. The actual explanation was far simpler and far more human. Kidman had recently lost her mother and was still in the raw, fragile place that kind of grief puts you in. The environment at a major fashion show, crowded and chaotic and full of flashing cameras and competing demands for attention, was exactly the kind of sensory overload that can make a grieving person flinch at unexpected physical contact. What the cameras caught was a single, unguarded moment in the middle of a longer and considerably calmer interaction, a fragment ripped from its context and turned into a narrative that was never really there. Hayek and Kidman were photographed together warmly later that same day, both smiling, no sign of anything wrong between them. And when you look at their actual relationship, the idea of a serious feud never really makes sense. Hayek's husband runs the parent company of Balenciaga, the same brand that Kidman serves as an ambassador for. Their professional and social circles overlap significantly. The feud that the internet decided existed was mostly a product of imagination in the particular way social media turns brief moments into permanent stories. The third name is Hugh Jackman, and here the story runs almost entirely in the opposite direction from what the rumors suggested. When Jackman and Kidman were cast together in Baz Luhrmann's sweeping 2008 epic Australia, some people tried to find tension in the fact that Russell Crowe had originally been considered for the role before Kidman personally encouraged Jackman to step in. A few observers pointed to some of Kidman's more measured comments about the casting as possible signs of discomfort or reservation, but those readings missed something important about the real history between these two people. Long before either of them was famous, back in the early 1990s when they were both young Australians trying to build careers in Los Angeles, Kidman was already close to Jackman and his wife Deborah Lee Furness. They were friends from a time before the fame arrived, couch surfing, auditioning, navigating the uncertainty of trying to make it in a city that does not make anything easy. That kind of friendship, built before success and celebrity reshape everything, tends to be considerably more durable than the kind built on a film set. When Kidman's marriage to Cruise fell apart in 2001, it was Hugh and Deborah Lee who were quietly there for her during one of the hardest periods of her life. She has spoken about it openly since, saying that they were part of her healing during that time. On the set of Australia, that deep personal trust translated into an ease that made even the most awkward scenes manageable. Jackman later joked that he could simply tell her when something felt strange, and she would laugh and keep going. The rumors of tension were considerably louder than anything resembling the truth. Their bond was not a Hollywood friendship built on proximity and mutual interest. It was something older and more genuine than that. The fourth name is Meryl Streep, and this situation is genuinely interesting precisely because it was never about personal dislike. When Streep joined the cast of Big Little Lies for its second season, she was stepping into a show that had, in its first season, belonged unmistakably to Kidman. The first season had been built around Kidman's performance, which earned enormous critical acclaim and firmly established her as the emotional center of the entire story. Then Streep arrived, and the dynamic on set changed almost immediately, not through any deliberate action by either woman, but simply through the reality of what happens when two performers of that caliber occupy the same space. Both of them were accustomed to leading. Both of them had spent decades being the most commanding presence in any room they entered, and while there were no arguments or dramatic confrontations, the atmosphere on set shifted into something more guarded and quietly competitive. Crew members described it as two actors holding their ground rather than fighting over it, each one completely aware of the other's presence, without either one willing to simply step aside. Kidman spoke about Streep generously in public interviews, as she almost always does in professional situations, but insiders described real pressure behind that graciousness, the particular kind of pressure that comes from sharing a creative space you once owned entirely. Streep never addressed the speculation directly, though a comment she made in one interview about everyone wanting their moment in this business was widely read as a quiet acknowledgement of the dynamic. The result was not a feud, but something cooler and more complicated.
two extraordinary careers intersecting without ever quite finding warmth, each woman maintaining a respectful but unmistakably careful distance from the other. The fifth name is Reese Witherspoon, and the texture of this particular tension was completely different from the one with Streep.
Witherspoon and Kidman were not just co-stars on Big Little Lies. They were both executive producers, which meant they both had genuine power over the direction of the show, and both cared deeply about using that power well. In public, they presented a united and mutually supportive front, but behind the scenes, two strong creative visions were pulling in different directions, and the friction that produced was real, even if it never turned personal. Kidman's approach to her craft is careful, emotionally precise, and built on deep internal preparation. She creates a specific kind of atmosphere around her work and guards it deliberately. Witherspoon brought a different energy, more instinctive and outwardly driven, with her own clear ideas about how the story should be told and what tonal choices would serve it best. Crew members described moments where it felt like two captains steering the same ship towards slightly different destinations, neither one willing to simply hand over the wheel. Witherspoon herself later acknowledged that working alongside someone of Kidman's level was not always straightforward, saying openly that they both had strong opinions and that the give was sometimes hard. But she said it without resentment, and the key detail here is that none of the friction ever crossed into personal animosity. If anything, the creative tension between them made the work sharper and pushed everyone involved to go further than they might have otherwise. Today, they remain close collaborators and genuine friends, which is perhaps the clearest sign that what happened between them was always about passion for the work rather than any deeper personal conflict. The sixth name is Miles Teller, and this story is a quieter and in some ways sadder one than the others, because it seems to have left a real mark on the younger actor without ever being fully resolved. They worked together on Rabbit Hole, and Teller later spoke quite candidly about the experience, describing it as deeply uncomfortable and saying that Kidman barely spoke to him during the production, often making him feel as though she did not want him there at all. For someone still building his career and working opposite one of the most respected actresses in the world, that emotional distance was genuinely difficult to deal with. People close to the production, however, were quick to offer a different perspective. Kidman's creative process is famously internal and disciplined. She builds an emotional world around herself during a shoot and guards that world carefully, because for her, the set is almost a sacred space where the work demands a particular kind of concentrated quiet. Teller's energy, by contrast, was more spontaneous and restless, the kind of presence that can unintentionally disrupt the atmosphere another actor depends on. According to insiders, Kidman felt the particular emotional mood she needed kept slipping away, and her response was to retreat further inward rather than engage with what was disrupting it. From Teller's perspective, that silence felt like rejection. From Kidman's perspective, it was simply how she works. Neither of them was entirely wrong, and yet neither approach left room for the other. They remained professional throughout the filming, but the distance between them never closed, and neither has chosen to revisit the collaboration since. The seventh and final name is Harvey Weinstein, and this one belongs in a completely different category from everything else on this list. Weinstein was not a co-star or a creative collaborator in the normal sense. He was a powerful producer who controlled a significant portion of Hollywood's most prestigious output during an era when that kind of institutional power was essentially unchecked. Working within the system he controlled meant understanding very quickly that creative choices were not really discussed, they were handed down. Saying no was not genuinely available as an option in the way it would be in a healthier professional environment. Kidman has spoken about this carefully and without making direct personal accusations, but she has been clear about the broader culture of intimidation and unspoken pressure that defined the environment around him. She has described it as a system built to keep voices quiet, and has said that women in particular understood very quickly who held the power and what that power could do. The relief she felt when the truth about Weinstein finally became public knowledge was, according to people close to her, profound. She has said simply that it was time, not just for her but for everyone who had worked within that system.
There is nothing left of that chapter in her life now, except the resolve it gave her to use her platform to advocate for a safer and more respectful industry. Taken together, these 7 stories reveal something consistent and genuinely interesting about Nicole Kidman. She is fiercely protective of her creative process, deeply serious about the kind of environment her work requires, and entirely unwilling to compromise the integrity of what she does to make other people more comfortable. That seriousness has sometimes made her difficult to work with, and she would probably be the first to acknowledge it. But it has also produced one of the most remarkable bodies of work in modern cinema, built by someone who never stopped caring about getting it right.